All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is approximately 1:01, and we're going to go ahead and begin today's webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. My name is William Moore, and welcome to today's webinar, Supporting Heroes in Mental Health Foundation Training, Building Resiliency, the Importance of Privacy and Confidentiality in Wellness Programs. Again, my name is William Moore, and I am with OJJDP's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. As your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and to provide a few announcements to keep in mind. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you may do so by locating the handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here you will also find a FAQ for webinar participants that will likely address any technical related questions that you have. Click on the name of the file and then click the download button. At the end of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session where the presenters will address some of the questions posed during the presentation. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arise. For those of you participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a few minutes to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there is no need to type anything into the chat pod at this time. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be provided with a link to a brief survey about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye out on your email for this certificate. And finally, the webinar recording for this event will be archived in approximately 1 week on OJJDP's NTTAC YouTube channel, where you can also view additional training resources, supporting materials, and webinar transcript can be obtained by contacting OJJDP's NTTAC Help Desk. Again, thank you for joining us today. I will now turn it over to our moderators, Elizabeth Toe and Beth Medina, for today's webinar. And Elizabeth or Beth, if you are speaking, you may be on mute. Okay. We may have had a little bit of audio issue for...
I'm sorry, everyone. It's Beth Medina from the Innocent Justice Foundation. Elizabeth is having some technical difficulties, so I jumped in here. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon where you are, and welcome to another one of our webinars. We're so happy to have you here and look forward to giving you information. This is one of several different webinars that we have put together discussing wellness programs and different aspects of them. Our background is as a training and technical assistance provider for Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force teams. We provide mental health and wellness training to different ICAC teams and their affiliated agencies to help mitigate some of the negative effects of chronic exposure to the types of materials that they see on a daily basis. So we talk a lot about wellness protocols and wellness programs that may be helpful in in support of those teams, and we identified some different topics that we thought would be great for webinars. So this is one of such topics, and we brought in one of our mental health professional trainers to provide the information today. We also want to direct you to our website, where we have many other resources and links to the different webinars we've done in the past, and explanations about what kind of support we provide to ICAC and other professionals who deal with traumatic situations and materials. So please feel free to take a look at shiftwellness.org, and we hopefully have provided enough information there that we can answer some of your questions. And as always, you can reach out to us, to Elizabeth or to myself or any one of us who will be on the with our web addresses at the end of this presentation, and we'd be happy to answer questions or field any kind of training questions that you might have. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. I'll turn it over to Jean.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start. And it looks like we have a great group of people from all over the country. I'm going to start by going through a little bit of information about the objectives of the webinar today. We're going to introduce the SHIFT program and what we normally cover when we're addressing wellness and the building of resiliency in the face of vicarious trauma. We're going to talk about the value of wellness practices at work, at home, and at the individual level. We are going to explain the importance of confidentiality and privacy in the context of wellness practices, how and when they apply. We're going to address concerns about mental health involvement with wellness programming, and we have several different ways mental health involvement can be included, and we'll talk about those as we go through the presentation. We're going to provide information for differing types of wellness practice and different types of programming that are available to both individuals and to agencies. So hopefully you'll have a good overview of all of those topics by the time we're done today. We also want to talk a little bit about, as I said, the SHIFT program. And SHIFT was designed to address the negative impacts of the traumatic material and traumatic experiences that people working in Internet crimes against children programs experience on a regular basis. SHIFT is designed to be a program that's about awareness and education regarding those impacts and regarding the kinds of things people can do to prevent the negative effects. So it is designed to be something that allows you to have information and skills and tools to prevent some of those negative impacts. And it's designed with an understanding that individuals are different and agencies are different, so there's not a one-size-fits-all program. That's why we provide a variety of different tools and a variety of different kinds of programming so that the solutions people can use are customizable for their circumstances and their experiences and their agencies. And that's a really important piece because we understand that people don't utilize programming if it's designed to be only one structure and it doesn't fit with their agency, or only one kind of tool and it doesn't work well for that individual. So that's the focus we have on what we do provide. What SHIFT isn't as a programming function is it's not treatment or counseling the way the program is designed. One of the components may be a recommendation that agencies have available appropriate referrals for treatment or counseling for people who need it. But SHIFT doesn't do that. And SHIFT is also separate from and not a component of law enforcement fitness for duty assessment or screening. And that's a really important component because that's one of the things that we hear people have the biggest concerns about as they start thinking about wellness. Is this information developed? What you see here is a component of our webpage, and you are welcome to go to our website and look at our materials. We have a section for law enforcement that focuses on people having access to training. We're able to come nationally to do trainings to all of the states, and people can request through their ITAC commands that we come out to do training for law enforcement. We have information for mental health providers who are interested in working with law enforcement agencies to help provide and support wellness. We have substantial amount of information about how to interface with friends and family for law enforcement officers, how to talk to family members about possible impacts of the work that you're doing, how to talk with children, how to work on communication with your partners, spouses, husbands and wives. So we really want to focus on the fact that we know that people need connections both at work and in their personal lives to provide support to have good wellness programs. And then we also have information and training available for judges and other judicial professionals that address internet crimes against children and child sexual exploitation. In the law enforcement component, we not only have access to our training, but lots of tools and materials that give people suggestions for things they can do, that remind people about good wellness skills and practices. And so all of those materials are available to people on our website, and we strongly encourage you to make use of that website. This is my picture, and it's the indication that we have started into the content portion of the presentation at this point. And what we're thinking about right now is I'd like you to think about where your agency stands. Do you have a wellness policy at your agency? Do you have an employee assistance program or another way to access mental health support or assistance? Do you know how to contact that? Does your agency have no wellness policy? Do you have a wellness program and someone who's a mental health professional who helps support and provide that wellness program in your agency, who's not providing treatment, but providing check-ins for your officers and often training and other kinds of support for the officers in your program? So be thinking about that as we go through the information, because that will help you think about what you might want to be able to add in the future for your agency, or that you might want to be able to use. So this first part of the presentation focuses on the potential negative impacts of the work, which is on the left side of each slide, and then the positive potential impacts of wellness practice and how that can counteract those negative impacts of our work. And we're going to go through this in sort of each of the components of our potential wellness in our daily lives. So the first one we're going to focus on is the physical. And one of the things we know about the impact of traumatic material and extreme stress in workplaces is that we have a substantial amount of exposure to excessive stress chemicals, which can cause a large number of these negative physical impacts, which include some more minor things like aches and pains, stiffness, those kinds of feeling uncomfortable in your body because the stress chemicals are hard on your body, and they can cause difficulties about just feeling bad on a regular basis. They can also cause more serious changes in your patterns of sleep. They can cause sleep disruption. They can cause changes in the way that you behave sexually with your partner, either more sexual or less sexual, or not wanting to have sex at all. And they can cause changes in your appetite, which over time can cause you to either lose or gain weight as a result. They can also have an impact on your reactivity or your kind of edginess in the world, whether you can calm yourself and behave sort of calmly and rationally in response to difficult circumstances, or whether you're more reactive to things that come up on a regular basis in your daily lives. What we know from the research and from the practices that we've done and worked with others doing is that when you engage in regular and consistent wellness practices, you see a very strong positive impact on your endurance, on your capacity to utilize good nutrition, on your ability to maintain strength, on your ability to recover when you're depleted or tired, and on your ability to relax and replenish. And all of those things contribute to your wellness over time very positively, and that's an important component of taking good care of yourself over time. When we move from the physical into the mental arena, one of the things that we see is a negative impact on mental functioning. Some people talk about these functions as the executive function or the higher functions we use to engage in our work and our interactions with others. And some of the negative impacts of our work that we can see are confusion or forgetfulness, an inability or a slowing inability to make decisions, a tendency to externalize or blame others when there are problems rather than to focus on developing solutions. A change in our alertness. Some people become sort of hyper alert all the time, which is exhausting, and other people become so exhausted that they can't stay as alert and focused as they need to be to do the kind of work that they do. And then the other thing is people sometimes lose a sense of time. They're not conscious of time passing. And that results in things like not eating regularly, staying at work way too long, not remembering to do tasks that need to be done in a timely way. And all of those things happen, again, because of the impact of trauma on our brain function and how some of those stress chemicals change or interfere with our normal brain function. What we see, again, when people do regular wellness practice is a real shift that allows for ongoing positive thinking, which results in things like the ability to do good decision-making on a consistent focus, with a consistent focus and consistently over time, that people are much more able to function adaptively and to be able to adapt to changes in their work, in their environment, in things like a case or what the court decides you have to be able to present. Your awareness is much sharper no matter what environment you're in, whether you're at work, with your family, with friends, and you're able to be much more productive because you're functioning kind of at optimal level mentally. And we know that wellness practice promotes that kind of functioning. We also see negative impacts on people's behavior from the work that we do. And some of those negative impacts are really focused on changes in the way people behave, changes in the normal activities that they do. They may stop exercising. They may stop doing the things that actually support their wellness. They may change the way they communicate, become less clear in their communication. They may withdraw. They may become shorter and less engaging in their communication, which can cause problems at work or at home. You may see people start to engage in substance abuse. Initially, that may start as a coping behavior to try to manage distressing feelings or that sort of hyper-arousal and always being alert and on that people have. We often see people becoming extremely suspicious, not just of people that you're investigating at work, but in their personal lives and of other people that they've trusted in the past. And you may see changes in how they react to different situations that are not positive. They may become more argumentative. They may be less able to engage in positive review of the situation and problem solving. So we also have some very strong positive responses to those changes when people engage in wellness practices. And those are things that we see positive changes in communication. We see strong positive ability to engage in teamwork as a group. We see more connectedness both at work and in their home life with their families, their children, and friends and extended family. And we see much more effective working across the board when people are engaging in wellness practices. And that's really important to understand. So we really encourage those as well around behavior. We see emotional impacts as well while when we're working with wellness, and the negative impacts of work in the emotional arena include things like beginning to feel numb. People talk about not having much response to things. They stop feeling much, and that initially can begin to protect yourself from some of the negative things that you see at work, and that can be very difficult for people because people feel like you're withdrawn and shut down. They may have very negative views of their experience of other people and of the world, and that can impact the way that they interact with others as well. We can see some of these negative impacts resulting in depression, in crying spells, in feeling abandoned by others, or literally withdrawing from people that they typically interact with. And we also see a lot of irritability, anger, and becoming easily upset for people who typically are fairly even-tempered. Again, we see very positive changes and positive impacts when people are engaging in the positive wellness practices. We see a sense of purpose. We see people who can have a good sense of perspective when they're dealing with difficult information and understand its context, that some things in the world are negative, but not everything, and they can remember the positive experiences they have in the world. We see the ability of people to access their core values and remember why they're doing the work or why they're engaging with such difficult material. We see people able to persevere and continue to do the work without such negative impact. We see a return of the ability to really enjoy life, especially home life and life with their families, their children, and people outside of work, and a strong sense of optimism, which is predictive of ongoing wellness as well as feeling good in the world. So we have a question for you right now. What are some of your main concerns around using mental health support to engage in wellness practice? I'll give people a few minutes to answer that question. I see that people are identifying the stigma that other people may see that as mean some sort of weakness or not healthy. Many people are identifying cost, confidentiality, of course. Again, that focus on fitness for duty or being labeled as incompetent. I see that people are looking at access, and that's an important piece. Lots of concern about how law enforcement will view it, whether it will impact your job, that stigma. Some people are focusing on available time, and whether people who are going to end up in trials will end up being finding out about that. Really great. And trusting, being able to trust mental health providers. I think there's some really great answers here. I'm pleased that people are being so thoughtful in those answers. I want to assure you that we are going to be able to respond to many of the concerns that you identified. We're addressing them directly in the presentation. And this next slide addresses the concerns that have been identified for us by participants in our training from around the U.S. When they're thinking about engaging mental health practitioners, whether that is as a trainer or a support provider through a wellness program, or whether that's seeking mental health treatment privately. People have these concerns, and we are going to address how confidentiality applies when people are seeking mental health treatment and how privacy applies. We're going to talk about the development of trust and some of the components that go into that, how you can ask questions and determine whether you think someone is trustworthy. We're going to talk about the ethical responsibilities of mental health providers to respond to those concerns, what they have to tell you about what their responsibilities are regarding confidentiality and privacy, and what you have a right to know so that you know whether someone is meeting their ethical responsibilities. We're going to talk about the difference between wellness programs and psychotherapy or treatment. We're going to talk about job safety and the issue of judgment. So hopefully we'll be able to address the concerns that you raised in the poll. Agency mental health, and again, this came up very clearly in the poll. What most people think of are things like fitness for duty, the screenings that you have to go through when you come into the job, when you get new positions, for any of your background checks, what it means if you go to treatment, what it means if you have to have days off or days on the beach, or you're told that you have to take time off, and whether you're going to be faced with the loss of the job, some loss of pay, some loss of benefits, demoted in some way. And I think all of those things do apply to certain components of what are formal screenings and fitness for duty, and sometimes required treatment in the face of those things. What we're talking about when we talk about wellness programs and seeking mental health treatment personally, proactively on your own, are separate from those things. And we want to be really clear that they are not included in the screening or fitness for duty work that might happen at your agency. So what we want to tell you first are what mental health practitioners are required to tell you. And this is across the board, whether you're working with a psychiatrist, who's someone who you might see if you need some sort of medication, whether you're working with a nurse practitioner who does mental health, who can also prescribe medication and do treatment, or a licensed psychologist, or a social worker, or a professional counselor, or a marital counselor. Mental health professionals in all states are required to maintain client confidentiality. That means they don't tell anyone about anything you've talked to them about unless they have told you ahead of time that they are mandated to tell someone what they're going to, and they have to tell you what they have to tell and when they have to tell someone. So if you are, for instance, sent to someone as a result of a fitness for duty screening, that mental health provider has to tell you before they start seeing you that they're going to let your commanding officer or the chief in your agency know when you're ready to return to duty, and if they think you're not able to return to duty. They have to let you know that in writing, and they have to get your signature that they've told you that. If you seek treatment independently and privately, the only things that are not confidential and that providers have to tell you that they are going to report to someone are if you tell them that you have abused a child, or in some states an at-risk older adult, and that they have to report that to either law enforcement or human service agencies when you tell them that. And typically it's within 24 hours that they have to make those reports. So it's really important to understand that if you go to a treatment provider privately, they are not going to be reporting fitness for duty information to your department because that's not their job. And if they haven't noticed you that they're going to do that, they can't do that by law. So that's a really important piece to understand about mental health providers. Even those mental health providers who practice in wellness programs and see people for check-ins, not for treatment, just as a part of saying, how are you doing? Are there things that you might need? Do you need a referral for therapy? Or do you need to go through your EAP for treatment? Those mental health providers also keep information confidential, and they should be giving you the same information about if there's anything they'll share. They should be giving you that information in writing, and you should be signing something saying that you understand that before you talk to them. And that's an expectation you get to have as a consumer of mental health assistance at any time. So you should always know whether they will share anything, what that might be, and whom they'll share it with. The other thing you should know about a mental health practitioner is we all in our codes of ethics have prohibitions against operating in what are called dual roles. So I should never tell you that I can be both your private mental health provider who's required to keep your information confidential and your fitness for duty screener at the same time, because those roles require me to do different things. A fitness for duty screener requires me to disclose information about you to your agency, your commanding officer, or your chief. And my role as a private mental health practitioner prevents me from disclosing that information to your workplace. So that's why mental health practitioners actually have prohibitions in their codes of ethics against operating in both of those roles at the same time. And if that's a risk factor, so if somebody tells you, somebody who's your department fitness for duty person tells you that they can see you privately and maintain confidentiality, you have a right to question that. It's just really important that you know when you can ask questions. And the other thing is that all mental health providers have a requirement to keep any records they have about you locked and secured so that they are the only people who can access it. So that's just really important to let you know that if you decide to go to mental health treatment privately, you can expect that information to be held privately. And it should never be available to anyone who is associated with your workplace. And just so you all know, an example is I have been to mental health treatment more than once in my life, and I testify as an expert in child sex abuse cases and other cases regularly. And I have never had any of my mental health records subpoenaed to court cases. So that's an important piece that you can understand, that those records, when you go privately, are private and should never come up in your workplace. You can also always ask your mental health practitioners to disclose to you what their specialties are in terms of treatment, what training they've had, and what certifications they have. For instance, if you go to someone for specialized trauma treatment, they may have a specialized training in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or in DBT, or in, they may have a specialty in trauma treatment. They are required to let you know if they have those specialties. They're also required to let you know if they don't have a specialty that you ask about. You may want to know about someone who understands substance abuse treatment, and they have to let you know whether they've treated that or not and whether they have training in that arena. They need to let you know if that they can give you references for people who know their work if you request them, and they should be willing to talk to you and answer your questions about how they practice. You get to ask lots of questions no matter how many letters are after their name. So feel free and comfortable to ask questions for people when you're thinking about going into treatment. I always say more questions are better, because then you're going to be more comfortable. When you're talking about when we're talking about what we present when we're doing the wellness presentations, we talk in great detail about the impact of the work. We cover in great detail how trauma impacts us and what those impacts look like. So we identify what we call signs and symptoms of the impact. We also do a presentation of very specific, large variety of differing tools you can use for differing impacts. So we try to help people match the tools they use to protect themselves to the specific impacts they're having in their work. We develop we also talk about the development of a mental health consultation and support program, which is different from treatment, where you have an embedded mental health practitioner who will help your agency develop team practices and tools that support wellness. We'll also very likely do regular check-ins with team members and help suggest tools, and may do regular training for your team as well. And that can be very helpful in terms of prevention and in terms of having access to someone you can talk to when you're having difficulty without having to move into going to private therapy every time you need to talk to someone. And that's an important piece of our program. We also strongly encourage people to develop and utilize peer support programs, chaplain programs, critical incident stress debriefings when there are serious incidents that your teams experience. And we've also encouraged the use of wellness dogs, which are really fun. We always get very strong positive response to that. And we encourage people to have access for their employees to employee assistance programs, which help with something that many of you identified in the poll, which is the cost of mental health treatment. And employee assistance programs that are well trained in law enforcement treatment and trauma response. It is very reasonable of you to ask when you're thinking about going to your EAP, are these people who have training in working with law enforcement, are these people who have training in working with the issue I want to work on, whether that's marital counseling with my spouse, or whether that's substance abuse, or whether that is a trauma response I'm having. You also have the right to ask them, and they should tell you, as mental health practitioners, an EAP should not be sharing information back with your workplace. You should have privacy and confidentiality there, and the only reports they should be making are around child abuse or people who are at-risk adults in some state. You should have access to therapy that specifically addresses trauma, such as movement desensitization and reprocessing, or cognitive behavior therapy, which is called CBT. And those are things that it's reasonable to ask about as well. So I think we're getting close to the time where we're ready for questions. We want to focus on you all having healthy bodies, healthy minds, and happy lives. We know that our work can disrupt that, and so we want to build in ways so that you can maintain that health and have those happy lives while you're doing the really important work of protecting children. So are there questions? What did we miss? Let me know about questions that you have, and I will begin to answer those in just a moment. I do want to make one comment. If you don't have an EAP or an employee assistance program for mental health treatment, there are ways to identify where you can access that. If you have a mental health practitioner who does a support program for your agency, they should have referrals for you for people who know what they're doing, treating trauma and working with law enforcement. If you don't, think about other people you can ask. Are there therapists that people in your agency refer people who've been victimized to? If there are, those people might know people who do work treating law enforcement and who know about trauma. So they're people you can ask in terms of having access to mental health therapists who know what they're doing. Think about asking your, maybe asking if you're concerned about people knowing you might go to therapy, anonymously through your statewide law enforcement association, you can make an anonymous phone call and just ask, are there people in my community who are good at providing mental health support to law enforcement officers? You can also look online. There's a program called the International Trauma Treatment Association, and many of your licensing boards statewide will list people who have specialties, so you can look that way. You can also email me or Beth or Elizabeth at Shift, and they can help you think about where you might ask if you don't know how to find someone who might be able to treat you. But I think right now we'll focus on questions from the audience. So it looks like we have a number of questions.
Sorry about that. I do have a couple of questions here. We have a question that came in about a clinician who is conducting crisis debriefing. Is there any situation where they would have to worry about notes being subpoenaed?
I think that's something that when I have done crisis debriefings in the past, and I did them for many years, both when I was a part of a mental health program and working as a therapist at a mental health facility, and when I was a part of a crisis debriefing program only and doing other work, we had a practice of not taking notes during crisis debriefings. If you have someone who's taking notes, you have a right to ask, are those notes private? Where will they be kept? And how will they be managed? Are they subject to subpoena? Are they private? And I would ask those questions very directly. Typically, if it's a mental health practitioner keeping them, they should be kept under lock and key. They should have to notice you about how they're kept and if anyone will have access to them. The thing is that if somebody doesn't know they exist, they can't be subpoenaed. So if the mental health practitioner responds to you and keeps them completely private, they should not be subpoenaable. And you should have strong conversations if anything's ever subpoenaed that is not relevant to, that's a standard practice that people have crisis debriefings and it's not relevant to anybody's work as a law enforcement officer. But I'm hoping your prosecutors would support that and make those motions.
Jean, maybe you could speak a little bit to some of the concerns that people had up when we did the polling, maybe specifically about the cost, and if you know of any helpful information around keeping the cost down or how people might address the cost aspect of the work.
Okay. I know of two things. One is it is really reasonable to look at your, again, if you don't have an EAP, typically EAPs are very cost effective. If you don't have that, there are, often you have a mental health benefit in your health care package that the department provides for you. It is reasonable to try to find a mental health care provider through that package, and you're likely to have only a copay in that circumstance, and that can keep this down if you can find someone who accepts your health insurance. Now, if you have an HMO where you have to go to a specific health care program, that is a little more difficult, although some of them do have people who specialize in trauma, and it's reasonable to call anonymously and ask that. Just call the main line and ask if they have that you are a member, but you don't want to disclose who you are unless you can determine if they have people who can meet their needs. The other option is there are a large number of mental health practitioners who understand that cost is a real prohibition for many people to come into treatment. And for people who don't want to go through their mental health provider or use insurance, they will do cost adjustments and reduce their fee if you do cash only. And you can sometimes negotiate fees directly with the mental health provider based on the fact that you're not using your insurance. So that is another option that I have seen a number of law enforcement officers use, in Colorado at least, that they will negotiate a reduced fee directly with the mental health provider when the provider knows that they're not using their insurance. Because often when you use your insurance, the provider is already getting a much reduced fee from your insurance provider. So they're very often willing to reduce the fee when they work with you directly as well.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Stacy, who's asking about being a clinician that's embedded in a team doing a wellness program. And do team members need to worry about the records being subpoenaed if the case they're working on goes to trial?
Okay, I'm not sure I fully understood. They have an embedded person who does the CISD?
Well, how about I read it directly to you? If a clinician is embedded in a team and the team is building a wellness program and through this program conducting debriefings and doing check-ins with team members, do team members need to worry about those records being subpoenaed if a case they're working on goes to trial?
I do not think so. I think that one of the things to do might be to check with your agency to ensure that any records of check-ins are confidential with the mental health provider, not department records. And I think that's how you want to set those up. I know that some of our commanders that work with shifts have policies that are already developed, and I believe they have a number of those things already worked out. Beth, I think you could get some of those policies to people if they needed them to ensure that they have information about how to word those things. If they're department records, it's probably much more likely they could be subpoenaed, but if the check-ins are the mental health provider's records, I don't think they could access them.
Well, I do know that in some areas where we have law enforcement teams that have embedded people, so folks who are doing wellness programs, which is very different than providing therapy, but who are doing strictly wellness programs where they do check-ins and help support teams, supervisors do not have access to any of that information. Like, all they know is they may have a randomized number for someone on an invoice that says such and such went to talk to the embedded team member for an hour, but they don't know who that person is. Supervisors don't, so there's no departmental knowledge of who the person is that went, only that someone from the team did go have a talk with the support person.
Right.
If that makes sense.
And in that circumstance, the records would be private, and they would be confidential, and they wouldn't be available to be subpoenaed for the case because they couldn't figure out who it was. And then they would be held by the mental health provider, not by the department.
Correct. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, because I know this came up quite a bit in the polling as well, the stigma that is attached to going to seek some support.
I think that this is something that has been a very strong prohibitor for people seeking treatment in law enforcement, and I think it is beginning to shift, but it is still available. I think it is very reasonable for you as a law enforcement officer to say, if you need time off work to go to treatment, to say, I'm going to the doctor, because it is a part of your health care. In every state, behavioral health is considered a part of health, and so you can just say, I have a doctor's appointment. They don't ask you what kind of doctor's appointment when you say, I have a doctor's appointment. You don't need to say. They're not allowed to question you about that. So you can keep that private. You don't have to tell anyone. I also think it's really important that if people have had a positive experience with mental health treatment and feel safe and comfortable to share that people do that so that other people know that it's okay. I know that when I've done work with different teams in the past, when people have been willing to share it, it has given other people then permission to go. So I think it is important that people feel comfortable keeping it completely private and not telling people, and that you have a right to say, I have a doctor's appointment or a medical appointment, and leave it at that. You don't tell them if you're having some kind of a doctor's appointment, all the details of that, so don't feel like you need to tell anyone that if you don't want to. I think you also, if those of you who do have a positive experience, maybe you had one in the past and can share that it was helpful to you at some point in your life, it's really helpful to other people to do that. And you can also do that by identifying that through maybe some of the things on our webpage. Sometimes you see them in some law enforcement writing, and you might want to just share that without sharing your personal experience so that people understand that we're beginning to get a shift in the idea that it's a bad thing to do. So I think there are two ways to go about that. You can maintain complete privacy and just ask for time off to go to a medical appointment, or at some point, some people may feel safe sharing, or you can share just information in general about stranger law enforcement people who've had a positive experience to start building some idea that it might be a reasonable thing for some law enforcement people to do.
I would also add, this is Beth, I would also add that having been doing this kind of work in law enforcement and affiliated agencies for, SHIFT has been doing this for the better part of a decade. One of the things I would say is, again, when we're talking about wellness programs, we're not even really talking about mental health. I mean, we are talking about mental health, but not the therapeutic branch of it. It's not therapy, it's wellness programs. And part of what we're teaching with the tools is that there's a lot of research out there that already tells us what is so great about using tools to do cognitive resets, to take breaks so that you give your brain a break. So we're building in tools that sort of let you work at your most effective and efficient level. And so having provided really basic, useful tools to use on a daily basis is altering how we're viewing across the board, how we're viewing sort of the whole concept of mental health and wellness as it expands in the workplace. So those tools are important just in helping effective and efficient teams run. And so we're seeing that part of the stigma is falling away a little bit because it's becoming a more accepted and understood concept that these are important things to think about when you're talking about how teams and individuals perform.
Are there other questions, or I guess we're at the end of the presentation, right?
Yes, I think we are. I think we have come to the end of the hour. If anyone has any further questions, you can always email us, and we will be happy to try to get the answers to you or get some resources to you. Jean, thank you so much. I want to thank you just for being here and imparting your experience to everyone, and for everybody who has been staying with us and being so good as to letting us work through the technical problems with the audio. And I hope you found everything really, really useful and pertinent to your positions. And thank you for the work that you do and continuing and wanting to make yourself more effective and efficient in your jobs and doing better so that we can do better work for everybody else out there.
And thank you all for the work that you do. It was a pleasure to be able to talk with you today.
All right. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Beth, and thank you, Elizabeth. Just wanted to wrap up today's presentation. As a reminder, we do apologize for any audio issues you may have experienced. As I mentioned several times in the chat, I will make sure that the video for today's presentation is uploaded to YouTube immediately or in the next 24 hours for you all to view today's presentation at a future date. The contact information has been provided in the chat. However, I did want to let you all know that we do have it here in the slides. The slides, again, are available in the handouts pod for you as well. For more information about SHIFT or the content presented today, please contact everyone accordingly. And you also may contact OJJDP NTTAC via the help desk by following the contact information on this slide as well. Again, this is located in your handouts pod. And just a reminder that you will receive a certificate of attendance. This certificate will be sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event today and will be sent via Adobe Connect in a thank you email. So please be sure to keep an eye out for that certificate. And finally, just to remind you all, we really would appreciate if you could please take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback survey. That's all we have for today. Again, thank you all for your time during today's presentation. Happy International Women's Day. Hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Everyone take care and have a great day.
Thanks, William.
My pleasure.